Thanks everybody for joining us today and discussing our findings about how bottom trawling impacts food security. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are all joining this webinar from different places in the world, and that I'm currently residing on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Shishal and Squamish nations, and that I'm grateful to be able to live here as an uninvited guest. I share this acknowledgement not as a formality, but because histories of dispossession still shape who has access to land, water, food, and decision making, which is inseparable from history of stewardship by indigenous and coastal people globally, and very closely connected to the issues of fisheries, livelihoods, and food security that we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So bottom trawling is massive. It catches roughly a quarter of all marine fish globally. So it sounds like it should be great for feeding people in general. But the question is at what cost this happens and who actually ends up benefiting from this. And for those less familiar, bottom trawling involves dragging heavy cone-shaped nets across the ocean floor. It targets species that live near the seabed. And what makes this practice so relevant to food security is that 99% of bottom trawling happens in national waters. Most of it on the same shallow continental shelves where small-scale fisheries operate. So these are not separate worlds. They're the same waters, the same fish, and increasingly a direct competition. And critically, much of this industry would not actually be profitable without government subsidies propping it up. Next slide. So a food system lens. So we deliberately use a broader lens that goes beyond just looking at how many tons of fish are being caught or provided. And food security has 4 pillars. So the first one is looking into whether fish is available to begin with. Then we look into if people are able to access it. Is it nutritious when they get it? And is the supply of the fish and the food stable over time? Beyond that, we also looked at nutritional security. Fish is not just protein, but it also provides irreplaceable micronutrients like iron, zinc, omega-3 fatty acids that are critical for coastal populations and very difficult to replace with terrestrial food in many places as well. And we also looked into food sovereignty. So this is not just about the food itself, but it's about the right of communities to define their own food systems. Next slide. So I just wanted to highlight that this has been a really great collaborative experience with a lot of coalition members and their partner organizations and connections being part of every step of this research. And Rashid and I could have not done this without all of you. So thank you very much. We really appreciate everyone's input from the beginning in developing the research questions, the method framework, and then of course, all the interviews we did and the support throughout all the case studies. And so as you can see here, we did a literature review, developed a framework, carried out interviews. So we did 9 different case studies across the globe. The work was done all from our desk, so there was no field work involved. So all the interviews and literature review was all done from here virtually. And the goal was not to just produce one global average effect, but to identify recurring patterns and the conditions that shape the outcomes. And so our final outputs are a report, case study briefs, and then the webinar discussion today. Next slide. So the talk today and the research report as well focuses on 4 overarching questions. The first one is we're looking into Where does bottom trawling directly and also indirectly detract from local food security? And what trawler practices most impact or affect small-scale fisheries? We call this a negative competition. We also looked into when trawl potentially does support food security and like, for example, which trawl fisheries deliver local nutrition or employment and under what conditions. Then we also looked at the nutrient share and the consumers from bottom trawling. And then the fourth question looks into the narratives. So what are the narratives in support of bottom trawling? Where do they come from? What do they say? And like things, for example, how do employment creation narratives shape social acceptance of bottom trawling? Next slide. So these are our 9 case studies on the map. So from Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, Ghana and Kenya in Africa. We have 2 case studies in India, in Goa and West Bengal. One in Sumatra in Indonesia. Then we have one in Aotearoa, New Zealand, one in Scotland, and one of the west coast of Alaska in the US. And these case studies were selected purposefully rather than opportunistically. And we chose cases that could speak to all of our 4 research questions, that gave us a broad geographic diversity. We kept a strong emphasis on the South and the global South context, and were feasible to research within the project timeline. We also considered whether findings could be politically and strategically useful. So it's not a random global sample. It is carefully chosen and designed to help us identify recurring patterns across quite different fisheries and governance settings. And so the most striking finding was that we found a lot of consistency. So across vastly different countries and contexts, from the coast of Ghana to the Hauraki Gulf in New Zealand, we found the same structural pattern. Industrial trawlers are not fishing in some distant, separate ocean. They're operating the same waters as the small-scale fishers or subsistence fishers do. They're often entering those zones illegally that are legally designed and reserved for artisanal fishing. They compete for the same species. They contribute to destroying habitats those fish depend on. And they divert the catch away from local plates towards urban market centers, export markets, and fish meal factories. And so this is what I mentioned earlier, we call the negative competition. So if we look at the nutritional component here, and we kind of see that there's a bit of a paradox happening. So bottom trawling supplies significant volumes of global traded fish, yet much of this production enters export urban market chains and sometimes non-food uses, rather than strengthening local nutrition. So the critical question here is not only how much fish is caught, but who consumes it, in what form, and under what condition. And we, at the beginning of this research, we looked at like the case studies and how we can design this. And there was a lot of talk about a global assessment as well. And unfortunately, we didn't really have the time and resources to go into the global assessment very deeply and focus instead on the case studies. But just from the literature review that we started and looked into, we can already see that globally the most important or the biggest bottom trawling catches are groundfish that are hake, pollock, and cod, which are being exported or which are being caught in Namibia, South Africa, Chile, Peru, Alaska, and Russia, and imported by the European Union, China, Japan, the US, and Korea. And then the other kind of big group are shrimp, is cold water and tropical shrimp that mostly come from Mexico, Indonesia, India, and then the cold water shrimp from Argentina and Greenland and Canada. And it gets imported to the European Union as well, China, US, and Japan. So I'm just kind of, I don't need you to remember all these like countries, but just to highlight that very rarely the catch is being consumed in the place where it's caught, but it's globally traded. Next slide. And so one of the most important and under-recognized findings is the gendered impact. So women make up to 40 to 50% of the fisheries workforce when you include the post-harvest activities in small-scale fisheries. And so this includes processing, drying, smoking, trading, but those roles depend on fish being landed locally at beaches and small ports where women have access. But when bottom trawling expands, those landings shift to industrial ports, to export facilities, to urban market, distant auction sites, where women cannot follow. For example, in Ghana, women who traditionally financed fishing trips face growing financial risk as catches decline. In West Bengal, trawler catches go to harbor auctions where many women cannot participate. And these job losses never show up in official statistics. Next slide. So losing more than fish is food. So food sovereignty, I mentioned earlier. So this is the right to define your own food system, the right of people to healthy and cultural appropriate food. In fisheries, this means not only what you catch, but also how you prepare it, who you share it with, and what it means to your culture, to your people. For example, in Alaska, in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, salmon is extremely important. It's up 50% of the dietary protein for the people who live there. But it isn't just protein. It's also ceremony, it's identity, it's intergenerational knowledge. Not enough salmon weakens the entire fabric of indigenous life. In Indonesia, a fisher told us they can no longer honor their cultural practice of resting on Fridays or when somebody passes away because there simply isn't enough fish to be able to afford to take a day off anymore. And in Aotearoa, being a good host at a marea gathering, a wedding, a funeral, a community meeting means providing seafood. And this is not a luxury, it's a cultural ceremony. Iwi communities now struggle to find and afford seafood they need in a lot of places. So the common thread across all of these is that bottom trawling is not just outcompeting other fishes. It contributes to restructuring coastal food cultures from the outside and without consent, and often without anyone in the policy meetings even noticing. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned, we also looked into when can trawling support food security. I just want to highlight, we're not arguing that bottom trawling can never contribute to food security. It can potentially, but only under very, very specific and limited conditions. So this means the benefits are retained locally. Work needs to be decent and fairly shared. The catch remains locally accessible as high quality food. And strong rules need to protect small-scale fisheries, livelihoods, and habitat. And the conclusion is that these conditions are very demanding. And in the contexts we studied, they were not in place. Keeping in mind, of course, as well, that our case studies were selected for contexts where conflicts exist. So bottom trawling in other settings where these conditions apply and are really like looked after may look different potentially. Next slide. So as part of our research, we also examined the industry, how industry frames bottom trawling. And you can see on the left-hand side here examples from industry narratives. And on the right-hand side, you can see our list of community reality. So we can see how these narratives diverge from the lived realities by the people that we talk to. And yeah, industry representatives position bottom trawling as essential for global food security and employment. But we clearly see that this is chosen over local food security, local livelihood security, and food sovereignty. It's a lot of talk about job creation, but like I just mentioned, under what conditions are these jobs created and how many in comparison to the local small-scale fishers that depend on the ocean and their livelihoods. We had a lot of arguments about that declines are caused by climate change or by small-scale fisheries mismanagement. And we're not saying that bottom trawling is the cause for the decline in those fish stocks on its own. We very much have the evidence for a lot of places that it contributes quite drastically to the decline, and it also pushes small-scale fisheries to the margins. We also heard a lot of talk about bottom trawling only on muddy bottoms where the impact isn't so bad, or that they're only trawling in mid-water and don't touch the seafloor as much. But we already have clear evidence that those muddy bottoms are full of biodiversity as well, and they're being disturbed. That those mid-water trawls contact the seafloor regularly. There's a lot of bycatch of juvenile fish, and there's a lot of damage to sediment. And then also another big argument is that environmental impact is localized and can be sustainably managed. And that might also be true in very specific settings and very specific places. But the literature that I could find for this and that we really looked into is based on very limited information from just a few countries. So in most of those countries, there is not really any information, or the information shows that there is quite a lot of impact and the fisheries is not sustainably managed. So here's a map, and I don't want to overwhelm you too much with all the details, but I kind of want to show examples on how policy and enforcement looks across the case studies we've chosen. So this is specifically looking at enforcement and at inshore exclusion zones where trawlers are excluded from the small-scale fisheries zones close to shore. And in red, we have 4 examples where I call it the crisis and illegal activity. So in all of those 4 places, trawlers routinely encroach on those zones reserved for small-scale fishers. In Kenya, for example, we heard that there's a lot of damaging of corals and displacing artisanal fishers when the trawlers breach the 5 nautical mile zone. In West Bengal, fishers told us that trawlers come in at night inside the protected zone, and there's a lot of gear destruction happening. And then we have the 3 yellow zones. They show that there is not necessarily the illegal activity that's causing the conflict or the impact on the local food system, but it's the lack of proper policies in place to protect local communities from being impacted by industrial trawling to begin with. Then in Ghana, we have an interesting case. That's the green box, where we are seeing big changes happening. So it's progress, a lot of push from local communities, small-scale fishers, and help from other organizations led to a 12 nautical mile ban of trawling. So we still need to kind of see how this shapes up, but it's a really big step towards progress and in a good direction. And then we have the blue box, Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, it's the southernmost state of Brazil. And there is a 12 nautical mile ban that has been strictly enforced. And we already hear that demersal stocks are rebounding and local fishers are regaining access to affordable protein. Next slide. Next slide, yeah. Thanks. And yeah, to zoom in a bit more into the Brazil case, it gives us a powerful example. Here, the local government was the one that strictly enforced this ban, and it's really well enforced. The trawlers are not coming inside the zone anymore, and demersal stocks like weak fish are rebounding. So local fishers are able to catch enough to feed their families and supply local markets with affordable protein. And also trawlers that are catching the demersal fish outside the zone, so the bottom trawlers that are just catching like not in the 12 nautical miles, are also reporting that they're catching higher rates and bigger fish. And so this has been a really positive story. Next slide. So yeah, talking about policy and enforcement, our findings point to fundamental governance failure here. Fisheries policy is designed around maximizing catch volumes and economic output. Food security often sits at agricultural ministries, and the fisheries ministry and the agricultural ones, don't talk to each other. Meanwhile, communities next to productive oceans don't have enough fish to catch. So clearly we need a shift, a paradigm shift from measuring success by production volume to measuring it by nutritional equity. Concretely, this means giving small-scale fishers a real seat at the table where decisions are made. It means recognizing gendered impacts, integrating food security into fisheries policies, enforcing inshore exclusion zones and expanding them to 12 nautical miles where possible, requiring vessel monitoring on industrial boats and supporting community-led surveillance. It means freezing the trawling footprint so no new areas are opened up. It means redirecting subsidies away from fleet expansion towards small-scale fisheries infrastructures and women's post-harvest livelihoods. So while the project scope did not really look into assessment of existing international frameworks, I just wanted to briefly highlight how bottom trawling clearly undermines four of the sustainable development goals. So habitat destruction, bycatch, seafloor disturbance, frequently observed by bottom trawling, undermines goal life underwater, below water. Aggregate production masks declining access to nutritious fish for vulnerable population, which undermines the zero hunger goal. Fuel-intensive operations, seabed carbon disturbance, and reduced ecosystem resilience undermines the climate goal. And women's livelihoods in post-harvest sector are disproportionately eroded, which undermines the gender equality. So this is perhaps one of the most important slides. Everything we have shown you today, the competition, the nutrient drain, the cultural erosion, the gendered impacts, stems from the same root cause. Fisheries governance that is designed around production targets and industry interests, with communities consulted as an afterthought, if at all. So first, before anyone sits down to write a regulation about bottom trawling, the first step must be to go to the coastal communities who depend on those waters and ask them, what do you need from the ocean? What has changed? What matters most to you? And not just as like a consultation of formality, but as the foundation of the entire process. And second, communities should rank their own priorities. So is it food first? Is it cultural practices? Is it both the same? Is it local jobs, protection of habitats? Those priorities, defined by the people who live the consequences, should determine whether trawling is banned, restricted, spatially separated, or allowed under certain conditions. And our research shows what happens when communities are excluded. Their food systems erode, their cultures fray, and their voices are drowned out by industry narratives about feeding the world. And this is not a new idea, right? So the FAO, small-scale fisheries guidelines promote this, they call for this. The food sovereignty movement is built on this. And also we can have some hope, right? Some progress is happening in Ghana and Brazil and Aotearoa. Iwi communities are challenging the trawling in marine protected areas. So I do think does provide us with some hope. So my last slide, if there's 5 things to take away today. First, the critical question is not tonnage, but it's distribution. Who eats the fish, in what form, and at whose expense? Second, the current system is a policy choice, not a natural outcome. We can choose differently. Third, Brazil shows us that enforcement of exclusion zones can work. Stocks can recover and communities benefit. Fourth, women and indigenous people pay the highest price and have the least voice. And fifth, changing this requires all of us: fishers, scientists, NGOs, and government officials to push for a shift from not just valuing production, but to valuing nutritional equity. Thank you. Over to you, Elsa.
Thanks so much, Anna. I'm sure we have plenty of questions for you, but we'll circle back to them at the end. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to highlight some of the housekeeping points that I made at the start in case you've joined midway through. There is simultaneous interpretation available for those who need it. You just need to select either the globe icon at the bottom of your screen or the 3 dots that say more, and there's a little toggle that says interpretation, and you can select the language that you want. And also, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Again, it should be a little square that says Q&A or 3 dots, which you select, and then you select Q&A. And type your question into there, and we will use those for the 15 minutes at the end for Anna and Sebastian to answer. And on that note, I will now like to welcome Sebastian Rodriguez to present his perspective on the research. Sebastian is the General Secretary of the National Federation of Small-Scale Fish Workers. The Federation works to help the fishing communities in India to access the rights and entitlements provided to them by the government. Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you. Thank you, Elsa. And great to be here this morning. I won't repeat all that what Anna said, and I agree with a lot of that, but there's some reflective comments I have to make. First of all, it's great that international collaboration between scholars and fishers organizations from various countries in the world has seen this study, Day of Light, Impact of Bottom Trawling on Food and Livelihood Security, coming to the fruition with 9 case studies from different parts of the world. Congratulations to DPT team, Anna, Rashid, and everyone involved in various roles, Zelly, Elsa, my colleague Siddharth, and the entire team, and also Blue Ventures for supporting this right through. It's an important milestone that 2 of these case studies are from marine fisheries in India. One from West Bengal at the Bay of Bengal on eastern shores, and the other from Goa on the Arabian Sea shores, also on the western coast, the other extreme of the country. Bottom trawling creates a number of impacts in addition to food security, which are important too. However, food security is something that hits small-scale fishers directly into precarity, and that needs attention in future studies too. Bottom trawling is one of the very important dimensions that creates damage with political backing. SSF communities find themselves pushed into impoverishment, and it's always constant struggle. Can this study contribute to turn the tides around? What differences can this study make to the lives of SSF in India and globally? How do we want this study to impact governance and organizations of SSF? It is indeed a challenge before all of us. Can this study contribute towards intensifying sensitivity to issues faced by SSF globally? Can it contribute towards enhancing capacity of fishers in our struggles? To what extent? To what intensity? What lessons do we draw from this study? It's great that study is presented in compressed in 23 pages with one column summary. How can this study speak to fishers and vice versa? Can this study be made available in hard copies? What can be the ethical levels of engagement between researchers and the researched? What is the kind of relationship this study can be made to foster? Relationships between fishers and researchers, fisher organizations themselves, fisher organizations and governments, fishers and the mechanized fishers, fishers, fisher organizations and media, fishers and wider society, and most importantly, fishers and the ocean. How seriously we engage with the above questions will determine how smooth is the path we chart towards thriving ocean-based life and livelihoods. We must also be aware that consequences of bottom trawling are amongst the mega contributors towards coastal stress, as I've observed in India. NFSF will ensure that effective steps are taken for its dissemination, reflections, discussions, and also critique, depending on vast contexts of Indian marine fishers, marine SSF fishers, and which is marked by a high level of diversity. These comments I passed mostly because we need to move and transition from research to action on ground. And that's the reason why these questions I'm placing here. Even though I am also a researcher, but my role here currently as General Secretary of NSF take precedence over my role as a researcher. And I open this discussion, I open these comments for you to ponder upon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Satya. That was brilliant. We'll now head over to some questions. We have a good amount of time for some questions and answers, so please do pop your questions into the Q&A box as we're going along, and we'll keep track of that from the back end. We've got a couple of questions come in already, both for Anna and Sebastião, so I'll get started straight away. Anna, this one is for you. You talk about centering community priorities in fisheries governance. What does that mean in practice, and how could it change decisions about bottom trawling?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think in practice, it means, like I mentioned, really starting with the people most affected and asking what outcomes matter most to them. And so, like Sebastian is saying, like, how does this work in practice? Like, we do all this research, but if those priorities come from the people, like whether it's women's participation, value change, local food access, then they can be treated as real management objectives, not just as secondary social concerns. And then it also means participatory decision making, better inclusion of small scale and indigenous voices to begin with. And yeah, maybe Sebastian wants to add a little bit on how you envision that, how this could work more in practice. Like if you actually have co-management happening that is not just based on a top-down idea of how management is supposed to look like, but that actually comes from the people to begin with.
Well, that depends upon the level of capacity that people have and the level of organization people have to engage with the co-management. But mostly the level of organizations, wherever there are strong, this is possible. Otherwise, it just top-down approach repeats. My experience is that only when people organize, fishers organize, including women fishers, then we can get the authorities on the discussion table. Otherwise, it doesn't. And it requires long-term consistent efforts. That's my experience in Goa.
So then you would think the first step would be helping, or would be organization if it's not already in place.
The first step in this our context would be, well, first of all, I must tell you that for fishers to join on a Zoom call is a very, very difficult option. And then secondly, I must also say that this time of morning for fishers to come on a Zoom call or any other call is even more difficult because the time here people go for selling and even fishing. So Zoom calls is not really a priority. So what is required is a decentralized kind of engagement with fishers with this study being made available in hard copies. That's very important because it's just not going to work. Soft copies, and we can't expect things to change on ground. I think we need to move one step at a time. And first step would be to make a hard copy and engage fishers and call their attention, rather qualitative attention to this study and what is written in that. So we need to make this study decipherable, and also decode, because a lot of things are, a lot of concepts are there in this study. I mean, it's not a joke to have this kind of study compressed in 23 pages, and that needs a lot of decoding work to be done on ground.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, both. I'd also like to welcome Siddharth, who's also representing NFSF, to join the Q&A panel. I don't know if Siddharth, you have anything to add to that question. Sorry to put you on the spot. If you don't, I'll go on to the next question. That's fine.
Not at this stage. Maybe I'll come back to it towards the end. Thanks.
Yeah. So the next question we have is for you, Sebastião, and Siddharth as well, if you'd both like to answer. How do you think that you will use the findings from this research to support your own advocacy work?
Siddharth would like to go first? I think, as I've said already, it is important to have a separate study sessions on this study in India with different groups, especially those engaged with marine fisheries. And I can see here, I mean, there are, from our organization, at least 1 to 3 people more other than Siddharth and myself have joined this webinar. I think we need to have a kind of assessment of this study amongst ourselves, and more importantly, go and take this study to the leadership of the unions in various marine states in the country, and understand how we can utilize this study, particularly with regard to taking it to the authorities, etc.
Brilliant, thank you.
I can say a few things as well.
Yeah, go for it, Siddharth.
I mean, I agree with what Anna and Sebastião have said so far. I think there's multiple dimensions of this study, and I think it's also important that we see this as a process that's going to go on over 2 or 3 years. And so I think a lot of the studies findings from this report are also for a wider communication. And I think that's something that's definitely a big challenge for small-scale fish workers, which is the wider public's engagement, because at the end of the day, I think fisheries management is not just an issue between the small-scale fish workers and the state. It is also responding to different kinds of pressures. And so where I see the merit of this kind of study is also not just for the fish workers, which is, of course, an important element, but also on questions of national and domestic food security and who loses out. And so I think from the union side, but also from TBT's coalition, I think that's a huge, big role that we will have to continue to play as well. And the second, of course, is the sort of global element of this. In a lot of places, small-scale fish workers find themselves quite isolated. And so I think the narrative of building it across the world, including clear examples of where certain kinds of demands and actions have worked. And so I think there is that element of sharing as well between fish workers, but also people who are supporting fish workers organizations globally, to be able to develop best practices of organizing, of policy demands, of sort of raising these demands that comes into play. And so I do see the study as also having that dimension, which is a very important one in these times.
Yeah, so yeah, you can hear me, right? Elsa, can I say something? Yeah.
We have another question for Anna, a specific one around Brazil. So what specifically made Brazil different, and which parts of that experience are realistically transferable?
So yeah, that's a really good question. We thought about this quite a lot as well, and transferable, scalable. How does that work, right? If you have an example. So in Brazil, I think there was a few key factors, and like the Brazilian researchers will be able to tell you a lot more details. But from what I understand, is that because it was a state-led campaign, like from the local government. And at that point, like historically in Rio Grande do Sul, they had their own local trawlers in there. But in the last 10 years, it was the majority of those trawlers fished in their inshore waters came from the neighboring state, from Santa Catalina. So the local Rio Grande do Sul people really, really pushed very hard to push the trawlers out of their zone. And there was a lot of lawyers involved as well. I think Oceana was really big, the Brazilian office, and they had a lot of legal support to really push for this and to really get the trawlers out the 12 nautical miles. So I think, yeah, because the port also there would land all the fish in the neighboring state. So it didn't really end up having this kind of impact on the local ports because there was no local employment on those trawlers to begin with. So the industry pushing and saying, oh, you're losing all these jobs and there's all this now, we have to import shrimp, or there's not enough for the export market, and all these arguments didn't really hold for those people because they didn't benefit from it. And that was quite clear. And that was one of the reasons why it was quite successful that way. I don't know if that explained it enough.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Explained it very well.
Can you hear
Rashid
me?
wants to say something, but maybe
Can you hear me? No?
I can't hear you, Rashid.
No?
Rashid, I think
I
we're
see.
having some technical issues, Rashid. If
I
you were
see.
able to rejoin with the original link, and we'll see if we can hear you through the other channel.
Original link.
Elise, can you send the link to Rashid so you can join with that one I sent? Oh, he already tried. Good.
We'll move on to another question and then circle back to Rashid on that one.
Yeah.
Great. So this is a question for anyone who wants to take it up. Sometimes industry claims they do sustainable trawling. Is this possible or just corporate greenwashing? Do you want to start?
I can try to answer that. So yes and no. It's a really good question. I think it really depends on how you define sustainable to begin with, right? So when we talk about Marine Stewardship Council giving out sustainability labels, we now know it doesn't look at human rights, it doesn't look at fair trade, it doesn't look at a lot of other aspects that kind of define this sustainability. So I think that's kind of the first question. And then I think it very much depends on the fishery. So yes, there is bottom trawl fisheries that have a frozen footprint that are catching the same fish in the same corridors over and over again, like every year. They have their very specific areas. They're very well regulated, and they're very, very like observed a lot. And so yeah, potentially, and it does exist. But even the ones that have these MSC labels have a lot of impact that goes unnoticed and unstudied. And the big problem here is that the majority of bottom trawlings in the world, there's no research that shows they're sustainable. There's no sustainable management in place. There's no enforcement in place. So the majorities are not sustainable, not even close, and nobody really has that much information. Or there's not even, I don't know. So now I'm struggling a little bit with my words, sorry. But yeah, so the big part is maybe in the global north, in the US and in Europe, there's a couple trawl fisheries that might be sustainable in a quite narrow sense, if that answers the question. Sorry, do you have anything to add? Or Rashid, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I just before the time finishes, I just want to thank everybody for the support as Elsa and Anna and all the speakers have already done, the TBT, the all of you contributing, right? This is quite amazing to be able to do this together, and it gives it legitimacy, So that is good. I thought, Sid, your comments were really good in that you lifted the project to higher levels, right? So, which I think is a very important thing. So we do all these case studies and do these small specific studies, but how can you scale it up and let it apply in different places? And also, like you said, which was nice to hear from you, it's not just about the small scale fishes and how it links to national policy food. So I kind of like that. And you talked about this is not just about today alone. It could take 2 to 3 years to really get this information out, to let it work and support people. So I thought that was very nice. The question on Brazil, why it is effective, Anna answered that. I was just going to mention the case of Ghana and highlight one of the things I see really helping a lot with this effort with the environment and social issues is getting the right leader at the right time in the right place makes a huge difference. In January, Ghana got a new government. That's last year, not this year, right? And the new Minister of Fisheries, she is amazing, You see somebody who wants to do something. So a lot of what happened was actually because we have such a person leading the ministry. And her president also supports her, right? So sometimes that's what you need to really get action on the ground. And I thought I should mention that. Yeah. So thank you all. And yeah, it's just the beginning in terms of what impact this can have. And it all depends on all of us actually taking this forward. So, all right. Back to you, Elsa.
Thanks so much, Rashid. Sorry about those tech issues. If you wanted to turn your camera on, Rashid, we can then pin you to the screen to join the rest of the panel to answer more questions. But
I should do this, right? Okay.
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. So we've got time for a few more questions. The next one, firstly, Sebastian Sadaf, did you want to come in on the other question around claims of sustainable bottom trawling, or would you like me to move on to the next one?
Personally, my observation is that there is nothing called sustainable trawling. It's like sustainable mining. It's an oxymoron. It's just not possible.
That's an interesting point. In particular, if you think about the subsidies, Anna mentioned that, distant water fishing fleets, for example, from the rich countries, you have China, Europe, and so on, giving subsidies that allow them to go all the way to the global north to fish, which they wouldn't be sustainable without that kind of support, a lot of them. And we did a study years ago where we look at bottom trawlers operating in the high and deep sea, and their profitability on average was about 10%. But the subsidies they got are 10% of landed value, revenue, I mean. The subsidy they got was 15% of landed value. So you just do the math, right? Many of them will not survive without the subsidies. So yeah, in a way, you are right to say that they cannot be sustainable. Many of them cannot. Yeah. Mm.
Thank you, Rashid. Thank you, Sebastian.
Mm.
Next question comes from Juan. Have you found in your research claims of better trawling technology, and do they stack up?
Mm. Did
I
we?
mean, yeah, there's always claims as well, and their technology has been changing and advancing and becoming more efficient and less impactful in some places. But most places where bottom trawling happens, those boats cannot afford that technology. Like Rashid said, they're profitable because of government subsidies. Now having to upgrade their technologies towards like touching the seafloor less, having more cameras on board, avoiding obstacles kind of situation. Yes, in the trawlers that have where there's a lot of money already and there's a lot of regulations and where there is that potential there, maybe I don't haven't really seen clear
Mm.
uh, results from that, but that wasn't really part of our research here. So it wasn't really part of our study. So that would be something to look into a bit more potentially.
Mm. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to build on that?
Uh-huh.
No?
I think
Okay.
I think I think Anna covers it. I mean, there's always people trying to improve and yeah, like bycatch. Bycatch is one thing that really bothers me a lot. And discards, not just bycatch, the discarding by say shrimp bottom trawlers is unbelievable, you know. And it's so destructive because years ago I was taken to Senegal to do some shooting of a movie. The End of the Line, some of you may know this already. It came some time ago, and we followed a bottom trawling shrimp vessel. My God, we were following it on our little boat and just to see what they do out there. And they were just discarding fish, good fish, throwing them out because they want to fill the hull with shrimp, which is valuable, right? It was so bad we started collecting the fish behind them. And when we came to shore, the village had a wonderful barbecue, beautiful dinner, and this fish was just being thrown away and wasted, right? So if the trawlers can reduce their bycatch and discards, that could be at least a good thing, right? But will they? Because they want to high grade. They want the most valuable shrimp to be in there, so
Yeah, or
yeah.
then and if you have like yesterday we had Linda Binken from Alaska, right? From the small
Yeah.
scale fisheries there, and the pollock fishery, which is one of the biggest bottom trawling fishery. I think it's globally, is it the biggest food fishery or something even? Like it's massive and it's
Yeah,
pelagic
it's
trawl.
massive.
It's
Yeah.
supposedly not touching the seafloor, but now studies show it frequently touches the seafloor. They have cameras on
Mm,
board showing it drags across the seafloor all the time.
mm,
And
mm.
they catching halibut and salmon and sablefish, which are really high value
Valuable.
species
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and very vulnerable, very slow growing potentially as well, and that the small scale fishes depend on as well. And they're also discarding all of it. So none
Yeah.
of it is kept even to like provide to anybody. And
Mm.
yes, in the tonnage of the pollock they're catching, not that, it's massive. It's a lot of fish, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, so Yeah, I
Think
agree.
of indigenous Alaskan or
Yeah,
Canadian, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And they are catching juveniles. That's why
And they're
even the
catching
quantity
juveniles.
looks small. But if you let them grow, you know what the value will be. Like you said, halibut is unbelievably good. Who hasn't eaten halibut here? Especially the chick, halibut chick. It's crazy. I mean, yeah. I see. Oh,
We'll go over to Sebastian.
Yeah, there is also a value to bycatch now with the advent of FMFO, fish meal and fish oil, being the dominant trend. Sometimes bycatch is more valued than the target species. I think this we need to also keep in mind.
yeah.
At least this is a case, almost a craze in India. Thank
Mm.
you.
No, no,
Thanks, Sebastian.
that's good. In fact, that's why I stress discards more than anything, right? Because bycatch, you use them in soups, in Ghana, the relationship between the big trawlers and the small boats also can be quite complementary because instead of throwing the bycatch, they actually, what do they call the Seco or something? They go there and they and the
Psycho.
small cycle, right? Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
psycho.
Cycle, yeah. So then they get it, and Ghana people eat fish of all sizes, right? So yeah, you are right about that. But they threw them away, and that is where the trouble is more. Hmm.
Thanks so
So,
much, all. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm gonna give the opportunity for you to all have a final statement if you'd like, in less than 30 seconds. So if anyone wants to say any last minute comments before we close up. Anna, would you like to go first?
I'm good. Sebastião, if you have, or Siddharth, I'll give you the floor.
No, I don't have any more. I think I already said enough.
Okay, thanks. Siddharth?
yeah.
Um, I mean, I think this is an important first step towards the work that we're doing ahead. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to engage with this work and also reflecting internally in the union on how we can utilize the research and build on it as a way to build the struggles. But just the final point, I think, is that all policy has come out of struggle, at least in the context of India. And so no research will solve the problem and the mess that we are in without having the organizations and, of course, the public support to support that kind of struggle. So, I mean, my reflections are always that we have to go back to struggle and demands and, focus on that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Siddharth. And Rashid, any final point?
No, this is really good. I mean, essentially, partnership is what we need, right? Studies or rules even cannot do it. It's civil society has to just sit up and make sure this helps, right? And you see it all over. In Canada, there was a big thing that was going to happen, and people just went into top gear. The allocation of funds for achieving 30 by 30 for last year was finishing. I think it finished last week, and the government was quiet. So it looked like they didn't want to renew the funding, which would destroy everything. You have NGOs, civil society, academics like us. We wrote to the Prime Minister. We did an open letter. We did press release, got an editorial in the journal. And yesterday, the Prime Minister had to come and brought back all the funding and a bit more. It's all about the people. Research cannot get up and do this for you. So thank you all for your effort, and it's just the beginning. You have some science evidence to back you up. It's just to take it to the places and the people who can help do the good stuff. All right. So thank you
Thank
all.
you, Rashid. It's a good point to end on. It's all about the people. And yeah, that's all we've got time for today. So for all the questions that didn't get answered, we'll follow up by email tomorrow along with the recording of the event. Thanks again to all of our brilliant speakers and to all of you, the audience, for joining the launch of this research. We really hope the findings help drive a shift in fisheries governance to prioritise food security, equity and livelihoods, and contribute to helping transforming bottom trawling globally. The report and case studies for this research are now live on the TBT website, so please do read, share, amplify, and if you have any questions, please get in contact with the email on the bottom of the screen. Thanks so much,
Fantastic.
everyone.
And thank you very much, Elsa. You have been
Thank you,
the force
Elsa.
behind all of this.
Yes,
So
yes. And thank you for all the
Very
follow-ups.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
Anna.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Everyone, thank you. Yeah. Take care.